All right, so we're going to do something different. We have a bit of a fireside chat. So I'm really thrilled to introduce three giants in research and leadership. We all know Dr. Hance Clarke is the president of the Canadian Pain Society with a really, really long bio, so we'll let him introduce himself. There's two other real leaders here as well. We have Dr. Aristotle Voineskos. He's a psychiatrist and senior vice president at CAMH, director of the Campbell Family Mental Health Research Institute. He serves as the joint vice president for CAMH UHN partnership. So there's a partnership between CAMH, which is our local mental health hospital, and UHN. He's a brain science superstar. And then last but not least, we also have Dr. Alexander Caudarella. He's the CEO of the Canadian Centre of Substance Use and Addiction. He's a family doc, he's bilingual, he's a healthcare ninja, and a man who's worked everywhere from downtown Toronto to Nunavut to make care more humane and accessible. So let's turn up the heat, metaphorically of course, and hear some thoughts on the biggest challenges and maybe opportunities facing us today with regards to pain, substance use, and mental health. You could be my love. Even if the sky is falling down, I know that we'll be safe and sound. We're safe and sound. I can feel your cup. You know my river won't evaporate. That's what we still appreciate. Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Renna. Thank you for that introduction. And gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. So I hope this is where it's going to come a little bit full circle in terms of, our ministers this morning talking a little bit about mental health and addiction. And so I've been sitting in this space, and I think a lot of people in this room were mad at me about a decade ago, and I said, this is something we have to address. And, it's certainly not what the mental health side of things. Dr. D.
It's a fireside chat.
Welcome to the Fireside Chat.
All right, go.
Okay, you guys can roast, I'll talk. Okay, all right, there we go.
There's no fire,
and
but you
so,
can eat it.
And
seriously.
so,
right, Lily? You
always full of surprises. All right, so, about a decade ago when I started to say, hey, this is something we have to address. And the psychiatrist and the mental health side of things said 1 in 4 people we see has an addiction issue because of their opioid. And I said, that is not true. That is not the data. Our data will speak differently, and it's probably 1 in 10%. And it's on us to figure out how we actually help our patients and monitor things as this moves forward. But no matter how many interviews I continue to do across this country and internationally, what is the only thing people want to talk about when I want to talk about pain? They want to talk about OxyContin. And this is something that has to stop and has to change. And we're moving that. We've moved the needle. We've reduced our prescribing. And so the one thing that's clear, though, is all of the money and a lot of the resources have gone towards harm reduction, gone towards, safe supply. And we're 10 years into this crisis, and we haven't really seen a shift from a mortality perspective. And so I've been saying for years that I think we need to talk about bringing the pain piece to the equation. And I was very fortunate that Dr. Caudarella was the one who reached out to me to say, hey, why don't you come and speak at some of our meetings, et cetera. I was welcomed in, we had some of these discussions. And he was also the one who said, why don't we enter into a little bit of a memorandum of understanding? And I thought to myself, this is what we should have been doing a decade ago to get the solutions and move the needle in the direction that we needed to go. And so I hope that, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this in a public space, and it's not on it's not on our program, because this is really for our society and others to really think about and talk about. And so I'm going to start the first question to Aristotle and to Alex. Alex, I'll start with you. So what do you think has caused the worsening of the opioid crisis, despite all of the attention attributed over to the past decade?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for having us, but also for absolutely talking about this need of looking more at this intersection. So, what's happened, I think there's been a couple of key pieces that we really need to keep in mind. And I think the first part is there have been some really big collaborative challenges. I think there's a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, a lot of death, and everyone wants to find that perfect solution. And time again, we see there's not a silver bullet There's not a one-size-fits-all for complex problems. So I think everyone's been trying to advance a perfect solution. We haven't spent nearly as much time saying, instead of talking about how do we make sure every patient, every person has access and is able to access it in a timely way. So I think that's where a lot of our energy is going to go. I think the second part that's really important is the landscape has shifted dramatically. So we are now in what we call a synthetic drug era. It's like drugs are not longer dominated by the plant-based drugs. Now drugs are everywhere. They're cheaper, they're easier to get, they're easier to make. It means that our approaches around prevention, treatment, all these different things need to be different. And so I think some of it's an overarching need to adapt. I think we are seeing some positive signs in some jurisdictions with reductions, but I think that there's some fundamental cultural things we need to be looking at.
Thoughts, Aristotle?
Maybe I can just pick up on the second point about the synthetic drugs and the way maybe some drugs, not just opioids, are different today than they were decades ago. So these are almost like, specifically guided missiles for the brain that are perfectly synthesized to capture the brain and hijack it in a way that, was less precise before. So I think that the availability of some of those substances in that way, can make it very hard to not be captured by the drug specifically, but also how quickly it can happen. And then I think everyone knows this. There's just a lot more availability, both from over-the-counter prescription and then other kinds of illicit sources than there ever has been. So it's a tough situation.
And Aristotle, I'll stay with you. So that data that we saw in the fall with the Ontario High School Drug Survey, that was pretty surprising. I forgot to put the slide in, but it's just to give the audience, if you haven't seen the data. So if everyone thinks cannabis is on the rise, and we all know that in the younger generation, alcohol is doing a kind of a downward trend. But the only drug that showed a bit of a spike and an upwards trend was prescription opioid. So after a decade of all of this teaching, we're in this scenario. So I'm curious, came out of your institution, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Hance is referring to a survey that was led by Haley Hamilton, who's one of our scientific leaders, who runs the Ontario Student Drug and Health Survey. And you're right, the opioid, I think about 1 in 5 young people, so this is 12 to 17-year-olds who are in school, about 1 in 5 young people acknowledged having tried something that was opioid-related. It's a survey, so it's very hard to know at this point. It's very early data, anything causal. So I feel a little cautious about diving into the why at this stage. I think there's more work that needs to be done.
I have a why.
You have it, Mike.
No, sir.
Well, and curious about your why, Hance. I mean, for us, I think a couple of things that are really important around this, and I think you're absolutely right in the caveats you put there. But some of the pieces, so first of all, we're now 10 years into this crisis. The kids who are teens now, they were 5, 6, 7 at the beginning of this. I think one of the things is, again, when we haven't been able to look at it holistically, one of the things we haven't seen as much investment in is prevention. And how do we actually work? And I think this is, again, why it's so important for us to be talking about this intersection of pain and substance use and addiction, because of this fact that if we're dealing with higher risk populations, what are we doing to really support their overall health? So that's the first part. It's kind of, I think a lot of the people who saw the immediate, overwhelming tragedy, like these kids weren't around for that part. They've kind of, this is this new normal. I think the second part, and this is what we've seen, is we saw a lot of pills at the beginning, this OxyContin, as you're saying, fake pills, switch to powder. Now we're seeing the reemergence of pills. And so, what we need to be talking a lot about not only why people use drugs or alcohol. We need to be talking about why people use a particular drug or alcohol. You hinted at, the younger generation is already coming, they want less to do with alcohol than any previous generation. We know things like availability, cost affect these things, but so does culture and acceptance and understanding. And so I think we have a lot more to do around helping younger people understand maybe some of the messages that we put out a lot 10 years ago too.
Both great answers. Yours was a little safe, Aristotle. So I'm going to give you my take. We can put it in the think tank now that we're at the same institution. And I'll say that, one of my thoughts are we worked so hard to reduce our opioid prescribing, and when our pain patients go to the pharmacy today, they get the Inquisition asked about their 8 or 10, Percocet pills. And, from a harm reduction perspective, we can prescribe 2,000 milligrams in certain pharmacies, and that's what we do, and that's all fine. But I think because that pipeline has been squeezed so much, and as Alex said, we've got all this synthetic products, et cetera, and accessible products, that I think people understand. If you can get a prescription opioid in today's society, it's probably the safest thing that you can have if that is the space you want to dance in. Hypothesis, but that was my why.
And just really quickly, so one of the things I think is really, when we talk to our European colleagues, one of the things that's amazing is, there's always this fear, okay, what are you going to do when fentanyl lands on your shores? And they say, you know what? We know probably at some point we're going to have a fentanyl problem. But fentanyl has already landed on our shores repeatedly. It just hasn't entrenched itself. And there's still this perception in our culture here that you can treat pain, you can treat mental health issues, you can treat hurt with a pill. And it doesn't exist in the same way in many European cultures, this idea of problem, pill. And so until we get to the basis of that, there's still this desire, and we're still going to see this need to reach out for problem, pill.
I love it. I love what you're saying, Alex. That brings us on to kind of de-siloing things. Like, it's so great working in pain because we all work together with different types of teams. And I think that's what has to happen in medicine. But Hance, how do you see bringing the 3 organizations together here, the Canadian Pain Society, CAMH, the Canadian Centre for Substance Use? We still kind of function separately.
So I think Alex just hit it on the head. And you're looking at a room of multidisciplinary care. That's what the pain space is. And unfortunately, you're right, pills for a solution. And we've hopefully moved beyond that here. And so the way I see this kind of continuing forward as a cohesive unit is a couple of ways. The first is, if we can be a united front as we talk to our policymakers, as we talk to actually how we go about integrating change in this complex problem, one size doesn't fit all, and even folks like Tara Gomes, who's done all of this research solely on the opioid harms, has now brought pain into that equation and said, where's that part of this solution? And so a united front is a powerful front. And I know my basic science colleagues are out there asking, so, how does that build? And if we build an ecosystem that has the ability to support it from top down and bottom up, vice versa, there'll be lots of opportunities for everybody in the game and all of the multidisciplinary teams. So that's from a financial perspective. The second is the most important part, and we have a symposium tomorrow afternoon. Dr. Callan Williams from Yale, actually, is one of our postdocs who's now going to be appointed at CAMH. And she's really focused on the intersection of pain, alcohol, smoking, opioids, benzodiazepines, you name it. And we're thinking about creating some new care paths and de-siloing this as we move forward. And that really is the answer as we move forward. And that's how these 3 organizations and institutions can work together, canvass the policymakers, and make policies that are cross-cutting, not solely one side of the spectrum or the other. And you know what we do in Canada and most of the world? We go from one swing to the other side of the pendulum and never land in the middle. And so let's all land in the middle and make both sides of the equation better.
I love it. Thanks. So Aristotle, I wanted to ask you, you're playing a lead role in the partnership between the University Health Network and the Center of Addiction and Mental Health. So really great programming. So the mental health and physical medicine really existing together. So congratulations on moving this forward. Why is this important, and what impact are you envisioning for patient care?
Thanks, Tania. So there's a lot of people who help bring this together. I have a role sitting with both teams, and the core idea of this partnership is to ensure that all of the people, at least our organization, 2 organizations take care of, have outstanding mental and physical health care. So a lot of people living with mental illness often have a mortality rate and an earlier mortality. So people with severe mental illness will die 15 to 20 years earlier, usually because of undiagnosed or undetected or underdetected physical health conditions like cancer, cardiovascular disease, and so on. And on the flip side, patients with cardiovascular disease or other illnesses are much more likely to have depression, people with respiratory disease, anxiety, and so on and so forth. And then those things in that context can be factors in relation to readmission, prolonged length of stay, having challenges following up with care. So the idea is that we take Canada's leading general hospital and Canada's leading mental health hospital and create a really tight partnership. And there's a number of initiatives that we've already started to move forward across organizations. That's at the clinical care piece, which is number one because it's patient-centered, but also in research. And then even in education and training, what we've come to realize is there's never going to be enough psychiatrists and psychologists to take care of all the mental health and addictions issues out there. So the idea is to find ways to upskill frontline providers and others to be able to both detect and support people with mental health and addiction challenges. So there's a lot there. There's a lot more I can talk about, but we're putting a lot of work in together across organizations to make this happen.
Congratulations. That's huge. All right. So, Hance, you were going to ask me a question.
I am. So, Madam President.
Madam President.
Madam President. As we're considering entering to this partnership with these organizations, the one thing that I think we have the opportunity to do is to ensure that this is a sustainable plan, right? And so what are your thoughts in terms of how, you're going to attack this when you become the president?
So I run the Toronto Academic Pain Medicine Institute, and we're a partnership amongst the 5 academic institutions that have pain clinics in the general Toronto area. So it's the greater Toronto area. And we review 7,000 referrals. And, like, Christian is one of them. He's standing, poor guy. We didn't even make him sit down. And so he's responsible for, him and the team, responsible for adjudicating those referrals. In 2018, we were declining 11% of those referrals because of active substance use and untreated mental health disorders. And then after an influx of money kindly from the ministry, there was a significant decrease in wait times. So funding is really important. So I think if we highlight the fact that with a little bit of funding, you can make a huge difference in your wait lists. Our wait lists at CAMH, we have an iPark program, which is an addiction and mental health program for people with pain at CAMH. Our wait list went down from 360 days to a month and a half after ministry funding. So today you can get an appointment in a month and a half, which is, it's better than waiting a year. So I think kind of putting our heads together to try to find ways of getting funding to manage this together. It does not exist in silos, just like the video said at the very beginning. We can't treat these things in silos. So having separate hospitals, we should be programs together. So I think putting our heads together.
Sounds like the future is bright. So this was not haphazardly thrown here. We're now about to talk about psychedelics. We're now about to hear about the post-war on drugs era. And, in this kind of last 30 seconds, I want to thank both of you, first of all, for your bravery in standing in front of a room of the pain community and talking about substance use and talking about, the de-siloing of mental health and its interplay. So is there anything you want to leave us with, the last 30 seconds as we turn the floor over to our next speaker?
I think pain is the perfect prism through which to look at the connection between mental and physical health and addiction too. It's something that struck me as a really amazing opportunity. It's a huge challenge, but it is an extraordinary opportunity, I think, whereby even though there's a challenge of one thing then comes with another and comes with another, then there's also an opportunity whereby if you perhaps help in one direction, you might also help with issue 2 and issue 3, for example. So I think it's a really exciting place to be, and congratulations on putting all this together.
Yeah, and I am really excited about the potential of looking more at this intersection and figuring out what we can do. When we have such high prevalence rates of pain, such high prevalence rates of issues with substance use, this cannot be a specialist problem. It has to become an everyone problem. We've been working a lot more with small towns and cities, actually. We just brought together mayors from across the country. And what was amazing is they get it. It's the health system that doesn't get it. They're saying, I have an automotive assembly plant in my community. I got tons of people on pain. Why is it that I got to pick one door or another for them to go through? And so I think what we're hearing is we need to start listening to the communities, and we need to find ways to be working together. We need to find ways to really just deliver on these pieces. They know, and they're saying exactly what they need. Our most recent stats are showing $20 billion a year lost productivity linked to substance use and addiction. And I'm sure the costs around pain are even greater.
It's double.
So if we really are serious, as our new Prime Minister is talking about investing in the economic wellness of this country, investing in people, we gotta start listening to them, and we gotta say, okay, people who have substance use issues are gonna have pain, people who have pain are gonna have substance use issues. How are we gonna help them get better, get well? I mean, we can debate as much as we want the more controversial elements of things. There's the reality that probably 80% of people living in this country do not have access to evidence-based substance use health interventions. And I think the pain community is going to be a huge, huge part. And I cannot wait to work more closely together to get those things into people's hands so we can help each other out.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys again. And I think we're going to bring Dr. Pereira out to keep the day rolling.
Yeah, thanks.